Let's cut straight to it. A'ja Wilson, the reigning MVP, may have just embarrassed herself more than she embarrassed the Indiana Fever. On the very night she was supposed to cement her legacy, Wilson's antics, her elbows, her flops, her cheap shots, not only failed to intimidate, but actually fueled the Fever to pull off one of the biggest playoff upsets in recent WNBA history. Tonight, I'm breaking down 10 defining points from this explosive Game 1. And trust me, each one tells a story the Aces don't want you to hear. On a night meant to celebrate greatness, A'ja Wilson instead became the symbol of everything ugly in this matchup. Over and over, cameras caught her throwing elbows, setting moving screens, and shoving Lexi Hull to the floor without a whistle. And let's be clear, these weren't the kind of tough, playoff-style plays fans celebrate. These were reckless, unnecessary cheap shots. She hooked arms on rebounds, threw herself to the ground as if shot out of a cannon to draw flops, and even jammed her body into players after the whistle. The worst part? Referees let it slide. Only a fraction of her illegal plays were called, and every missed whistle chipped away at the credibility of the officiating. But here's the twist. Instead of rattling Indiana, those antics woke them up. The Fever looked at Wilson's behavior not as dominance, but as desperation. A'ja was supposed to be the poised leader of the defending champs. Instead, she came off like a frustrated bully. And as any competitor knows, the moment your opponent stops fearing you, the game flips upside down. Most teams, when shoved, elbowed, and knocked to the ground by a reigning champion, would fold. They'd play timid, second-guess themselves, or let the physicality dictate the game. But the Indiana Fever, they did the exact opposite. Every push from A'ja Wilson became fuel. Every cheap shot from Jackie Young or Chelsea Gray was turned into motivation. Instead of shrinking, Indiana's body language grew stronger. You could see it in the way Odyssey Sims dug her heels in on defense, or how Lexi Hull kept picking herself up with a grin after being tossed to the hardwood. The Fever played with pace, whipping the ball around the court, pushing in transition, and striking back with relentless aggression. Suddenly, it wasn't the two-time champion Aces dictating the tempo. It was a short-handed underdog team flipping the script. Las Vegas wanted intimidation. Indiana gave them resistance. And in basketball, there's nothing more dangerous than an underdog that refuses to be bullied. The Fever's resilience didn't just keep them alive, it set the emotional tone for the entire upset. If there was one player who stole the spotlight from A'ja Wilson's MVP ceremony, it was Kelsey Mitchell. The veteran guard delivered the performance of her life, dropping a playoff career-high 34 points and making it look effortless. But this wasn't just scoring, it was defiance. The Aces rotated defender after defender onto her, Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray, even Kristen Bell at times. It didn't matter. Mitchell sliced through them all, draining dagger jumpers, attacking the rim with precision, and pulling up with confidence that silenced the Las Vegas crowd. Each basket wasn't just points on the board, it was psychological warfare. Every swish reminded the Aces that their intimidation tactics had failed, that no shove or cheap shot could knock Mitchell off her rhythm. By the fourth quarter, you could see it in her swagger. Mitchell knew she was untouchable. The Aces had championship banners, MVP trophies, and the home crowd on their side. But Mitchell had the one thing that mattered most: answers on the scoreboard. She turned the so-called favorites into the ones looking helpless. Heading into Game 1, the Las Vegas Aces weren't just confident, they were arrogant. Hours before tip-off, A'ja Wilson was handed her MVP trophy in front of a roaring home crowd. Becky Hammon, their head coach, told the media that Indiana hadn't even seen the real Aces yet, brushing off the Fever's 2 regular season wins as flukes. Analysts across networks treated Indiana like a footnote, a warm-up round before Vegas steamrolled toward another title. The message was loud and clear. This was supposed to be a coronation, not a contest. But when the game began, that smug confidence collapsed. Every assumption that Indiana couldn't keep pace, that they would fold without Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, was shredded possession by possession. The Aces played as if they expected the Fever to roll over, and when that didn't happen, panic set in. What was billed as a celebration of dominance turned into a reality check. By the final buzzer, the MVP ceremony felt less like a crowning moment, and more like a jinx. Overconfidence wasn't just a weakness for Las Vegas, it was their downfall. On paper, the Indiana Fever had no business winning this game. They were missing 6 players, including Caitlin Clark, the biggest name in women's basketball, and Sophie Cunningham, another vital piece of their rotation. Sydney Colson was also sidelined, and the list didn't stop there. Most teams stripped of that much firepower would struggle just to stay competitive, let alone walk into the most hostile arena in the league and win. Yet that's exactly what Indiana did. Their depleted roster turned into their secret weapon. With fewer stars, there was no pressure, no burden of expectation. Players like Kelsey Mitchell, Odyssey Sims, Lexi Hull, and Aaliyah Boston were free to play their game, to seize the moment without worrying about fitting into a rigid system. And that freedom showed on the court. Every possession felt like a statement that depth, grit, and chemistry can beat raw talent and hype. The Aces assumed they were facing a wounded opponent. Instead, they faced a team that had nothing to lose, and that made them lethal. The upset wasn't just shocking, it was historic because of who Indiana didn't have on the floor. If one moment defined this upset, it was Aaliyah Boston's duel with Aja Wilson. Hours after Wilson held her MVP trophy, she was made to look ordinary by a second-year center playing in her very first semifinal. Boston turned the paint into a fortress. She bodied Wilson on every post-up, denied her favorite spots, and forced her into tough contested looks. The result? Wilson shot a miserable 6 for 22 from the field. That's the reigning MVP, the so-called unstoppable force of the league, reduced to frustration, flops, and begging referees for calls. Meanwhile, Boston stayed poised. She didn't overextend. She didn't bite on fakes. She simply stood her ground and trusted her strength, her footwork, and her discipline. And the contrast was striking. While Wilson threw her hands up at officials and leaned into desperation, Boston looked calm, collected, and completely in control. For all the hype surrounding Wilson's legacy, it was Boston who owned the spotlight that night. She proved that composure beats chaos, and strength combined with discipline can silence even the loudest star. The Fever's victory wasn't just about Kelsey Mitchell's brilliance or Aaliyah Boston's dominance. It was about an entire roster rising to the occasion. Odyssey Sims, a veteran who has been waiting for a moment like this, played with fearless confidence. She drove into the lane against bigger defenders, disrupted passing lanes on defense, and steadied the Fever whenever Vegas tried to make a run. Natasha Howard and Brianna Turner did the dirty work in the paint, matching Las Vegas's physicality with clean, disciplined defense that exposed the Aces' frustration. And then there was Lexi Hull. While she won't grab headlines for her scoring, her defense on Jackie Young was suffocating. She forced Young into tough angles, denied her rhythm, and finished the night with a staggering +24 ±, the best of any player on the court. That's impact you can measure, even if it doesn't show up in highlight reels. Together, this supporting cast proved that the Fever's strength isn't in one star, it's in a collective. They embraced the we over me mentality, and that unity made them impossible to rattle. The Aces were supposed to look like champions, poised, composed, and ready for the moment. Instead, as soon as Indiana refused to fold, Las Vegas lost their identity. Rather than sticking to their flowing offense and ball movement, they devolved into shoving matches, flopping theatrics, and non-stop complaints to the referees. Jackie Young laid screens that looked more like football hits. Chelsea Gray tried to bait fouls instead of running the offense. And Aja Wilson, their MVP, spent more time throwing her arms up in protest than putting the ball in the basket. The longer Indiana stood tall, the more the Aces panicked. Their swagger vanished, replaced by desperation. Even Becky Hammon's post-game comments reflected denial. She pointed to miscues and missed opportunities, but refused to credit Indiana's execution. It was the behavior of a team unprepared for resistance. A team that thought they'd walk through the series but instead got punched in the mouth. The unraveling wasn't just on the scoreboard, it was psychological, and the Fever exposed every crack. What happened in Game 1 wasn't just a playoff upset, it was a rewriting of WNBA history. Rarely has a team so decimated by injuries walked into the home of a reigning champion and stolen the spotlight so completely. Indiana didn't just beat Las Vegas, they humiliated them on their own floor, in front of their own fans, on the very night Aja Wilson was crowned MVP. This was a game that will be replayed for years, not only because of the result, but because of what it symbolized, a seismic shift in power. For nearly half a decade, the Aces have been seen as untouchable, a dynasty in the making. But dynasties don't lose like this. Not to a short-handed underdog, not in their prime, not when they're expected to dominate. Indiana's win carved a new chapter in the league's narrative, one where the Fever are no longer rebuilding. They're here, they're fearless, and they're ready to challenge the throne. When historians look back, this game will be circled as the night the balance of power in women's basketball began to shift. The ripple effect of this game will extend far beyond one semifinal. Indiana's upset has thrown the entire playoff picture into chaos. Before tip-off, the narrative was simple. The Las Vegas Aces were supposed to cruise to another finals appearance, setting up yet another coronation for Aja Wilson and Becky Hammon. But now, the league has been reminded that nothing is guaranteed, not even for so-called dynasties. Every contender left in the bracket is watching this game on replay, realizing that the Aces are vulnerable, and that even a short-handed underdog can shake the league to its core. For fans, this means drama, unpredictability, and history in the making. For the Fever, it means belief that no matter who's missing from the lineup, they're still capable of toppling giants. And for the Aces, it's a warning. The aura of invincibility is gone, and opponents smell blood. This wasn't just one upset, it was the moment that shifted how the playoffs will be played, remembered, and feared for years to come.